Good morning. Welcome back to Passionate World Radio Network. Distinguish yourself from the ordinary. And this morning on Lillian's interviews, our special guest back from the Miami International Book Fair, Levy, who wrote 2 books, Second Street Station and Brooklyn on Fire, and his main character is Mary Henley, the first woman detective in Brooklyn. So good morning, Larry. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Lillian. How are you this morning?
I'm doing pretty well, getting ready for the cold snap that's about to encroach from the far north.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty lucky out here in Los Angeles in that the cold snap doesn't hit us too hard.
Any rain, snow?
Not much. We've
much.
had a little mist recently, but not a lot of rain. We desperately need rain.
I'll be more than happy to send you our share.
Why, thank you. We would gladly take it out here.
Or some of the snow from upstate New York, or even from Michigan or Chicago.
It actually snowed here. I've been here for a number. I'm from New York originally.
Right.
But it actually snowed here about one time, maybe 25 years ago, I remember. That was about it.
Okay, well, keep your fingers crossed.
It's time. Every quarter century, it's time for a little snow.
That's right. You need to, clear off the streets, freeze all the germs and the bad bugs away. And then you can start all over again.
Sounds good. Okay, I'm ready.
You're ready. Okay. So Larry has other things besides just writing books, but these 2 were nominated. So what can you tell? It's set during the 1880s.
Yeah, the first book takes place in 1888, the second in 1890.
Okay.
I just finished the third, which will be out probably in about a year, and that takes place in 1894. It's about Mary Handley, who was a real person, and she was hired by the Brooklyn Police Department when there were no policewomen to help sleuth a high-profile murder in Brooklyn, New York. And the first book has to do with Edison and Tesla and the fight over the electricity market and the early marketing of Coca-Cola, and basically the misogyny that Mary has to deal with being a woman in a man's world and trying to do what she wants to do with her life, and which is to be a detective. And she gets her opportunity. And as it turns out, she does a good job, and she continues on as a private detective afterwards, setting up afterwards. In the second book, she's set up in the back room of a bookstore of a friend of hers who owns a bookstore, and that's where her office is. And she deals with interesting murder cases. In the second book, Brooklyn on Fire, it has to do with something that I never knew, and I was born in Brooklyn and grew up in New York, is that Brooklyn was a city in its own back then, and it was the 4th largest city in the United States, and what happened is that New York annexed Brooklyn at some point, and there was a huge scandal around it. So Mary winds up dealing with murders around that scandal. That turns out to be part of that scandal, and it's kind of interesting. And she deals with luminaries of the time. And in the first book, she's dealing with Edison and Tesla and J.P. Morgan. In the second book, she's dealing with the Vanderbilts and Andrew Carnegie. So there's a nice feeling for history. And what's very interesting is that time, which was called the Gilded Era, is very much like today, because the robber barons were the one-percenters of their day, and the people the middle class was just starting. There wasn't much of a middle class yet, and it was very hard for people to move up into the middle class because of the poor wages that were being paid. So there are some very interesting parallels.
Now, we know, one, we're introduced to different detectives, Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes and Cadfield and some of the others, right, that they have some peculiarities that distinguish them as to who they are and also influence what they do. Does Mary have any of these problems?
Well, I mean, her main problem is that she's a woman trying to do what they consider a man's job. and she was a person, because she was a woman, she was denied an education. So she's totally self-educated, and she's a brilliant woman. So she can quote you from any piece of literature possible. When she was a little girl, her parents had bought an Encyclopedia Britannica, hoping that her brother would be interested in an education, and he wasn't. But she read it from page to page, and she absorbed that knowledge. And her father had a friend who owned a bookstore, and the fellow would lend him. He had a used book section which he would lend him to bring home to his daughter to read. And so she's extremely well read and self-educated and very bright and not afraid of anyone. She stands up to the people who belittle her, who supposedly have more power than she does. So, I mean, and that can get her in trouble sometimes, like it does in some of the books, but she won't stand down. She won't relinquish her right to have an opinion and to do what she thinks is right.
Yes, I've lost a couple of jobs down in Houston, Texas, exactly for those same characteristics. I would tell them at interviews, I don't make coffee and I don't serve coffee. I didn't get hired immediately. Let me tell you, I was not very well favored because it's a male chauvinist.
I mean, that does happen, and
yes.
It still happens today.
Yes.
I mean, there's a scene, or and I guess not a scene, but it's a section of the book where she's first meeting with Edison and his crew, and they treat her like, oh, isn't it so interesting that a lady would be doing detective work? How nice of them to give this person who was never going to succeed at this an opportunity,
Condescending, yes.
Yeah, very condescending.
I run into that a lot. Because
so, I mean, she deals with that all the time.
Yes.
And sometimes she's quipping back at them, and because she's very bright, she's very fast with the turn of the phrase. And sometimes politically she stands back just because she knows she has to get something from the person she's talking to. She doesn't want to offend them because she needs some information. It depends on how she does, but usually she's very quick with a quip back and puts people on notice that she's no fool.
Which is good. Now I'm going to ask you a very interesting question.
What?
A lot of the mysteries or women that are projected into strong roles, let me put it that way, especially on the idiot box, i.e. television. And they always land up having either a strong family in back of them, and or they are brought in an interesting man or woman, depending, and they have a form an affection for them as well. Everyone, I guess, except for Poirot, who disdains everybody. So are you going to plan on doing something like that, or are you going to...
What Mary has in the first two books, Second Street Station and Brooklyn on Fire, she has a family, but her mother is incredibly unsupportive of her, because her mother is very much goes by the mores of the day and wants to just get married and have a family and raise children. And
right.
Her father is more supportive of her in his own way. She's very much alone in certain respects as far as that's concerned. She has a close friend, Sarah, who is very supportive of her. And in the second book, when she gets into the bookstore where she had worked part-time, while she was struggling as a detective, the owner of the bookstore, Laszlo, is incredibly supportive of her. He would be like, he is a parental type in that he's in his late 50s, but he's a very intellectual man who's also incredibly proud of what she's doing and is supportive of her. And she does have relationships in the movie. And there's a relationship with a man in the first book, and in the second book, actually, with George Vanderbilt, one of the Vanderbilts. But they don't give her power. Her power and her strength is within her.
Right.
And, she deals with disappointment and heartbreak and struggling by herself, and she's just plows through it and is a strong human being to do it, to be able to accomplish these things.
Which is good, because I think that...
It's not that she's leaning on somebody else for power. She has her own power.
She has her own power, and I think that's good because girls and women need to see this.
Yeah, she's very much an individual, an independent woman.
Yes,
in a time when there weren't very many independent women.
Absolutely, and I just think that's tremendous. So what kind of research do you do in order to get the authenticity in your books?
Well, there's constant research, just every day when I'm writing. Something as simple as somebody speaking in the book and they say, did they use that word back then? Mm-hmm. And then you go up and fortunately online you can find Merriam-Webster. And Merriam-Webster online in a lot of cases will tell you when a word was first in use. So that's very helpful. And, it's interesting. You find out different things. And it's in my third book right now, for instance, that I'm just completed. I had a murder under the boardwalk in Coney Island. And all of a sudden I'm doing research and I realized the boardwalk wasn't built until the 20th century.
That's right.
So I can't do that.
Unless you build a dock.
So
you have a dock going out to the water.
What's interesting about it is that when you do more research, I found a much better place for this murder to happen. Yes. And I go, my God, this is, if I made up this particular place, people wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
They'd say, oh, that wouldn't happen. But it was a real place, and I'll tell you what it was. There was a hotel in Coney Island called the Elephant Hotel, which was built in the shape of an elephant.
Oh, my.
And, with a trunk and tusks and all that stuff, and it had 31 rooms, and it was built in wood, but they put tin around it to give it that gray look of an elephant. Right. And it was a tourist attraction for a number of years. Then towards the end of its existence, it burnt down in 1896. The area had deteriorated and became a prostitute hotel. And when people would walk up to a prostitute and say, I want to see the elephant, it means let's go to the Elephant Hotel and do our stuff. Okay. Great. So, if I hadn't researched and found out there was no boardwalk, I would have never found the Elephant Hotel.
Which is, there are so many gems in history. Yeah. And you have to dig them out. Yeah. Kind of like
it's amazing, and you get a lot of your story ideas from that. You go back and you see what kind of scandals were going on or what murders were committed, and it's very interesting,
I find it interesting, and when people tell me that history is dry and dull, I kind of look at them and say, and what kind of history are you reading? Because there's so much in there. And it used to be, I thought, American history so dry and yucky compared to European history. But after I did some research for one or two of the books that I was working on, I was really struck dumb with amazement with some of the colorful little episodes that happened, but because it didn't involve the right people who later were in a position to write about it. They didn't.
Well, it's funny. There were certain things back then that were considered verboten or forbidden, but at the same time, if you used the right language, it was allowed. Like, for instance, if you were gay, you could pass yourself off as a confirmed bachelor and not have to deal with the scandal of being gay back then.
Exactly. Just don't get caught.
And there were many prominent figures who were, quote, confirmed bachelors even in political life, and it didn't seem to hurt them because they used that term and the rest of their lives. I guess back then they didn't have the internet and TV and the different things that could intrude in your lives to expose people.
And I think
so some of these people were able to lead decent lives, even though the horror of the anti-gay thought back then, but they were left alone,
Well, another thought occurs to me, too. During that time, it was permissible for men, especially older men, but also young men, to visit the brothels where there were the progeny of whores.
Right.
And they were young girls, and they were groomed to go out with the older men. Mm-hmm. And the older men had a promise not to molest them unless they were willing to invest in them to really marry them. And, of course, we now call pedophiles. And there were several literary characters, real men who apparently were pedophiles. And the mothers were aware of their attachment to young, tender things. So they always sat in the parlor when these well-known literary gentlemen came a-calling.
Yeah, no, that's terrible. That was an actual practice. That's awful.
Yes, but it was. I mean, that's what's her face was in when she was 12 or 13. But the idea was there were a lot of these type of no-nos going around in society.
And there were certain places that were hands-off also. For instance, I'm very much believe in gay rights and all of that's what's going on today with gays being able to marry and stuff like that. I think that's fabulous because they're just human beings like everybody else. I mean, that's absurd that they should be prejudiced. There should be prejudice against them. But there were places back then that they called resorts.
Yes.
Which were bars that you could go to, and men could meet other men, women could meet other women, and there were rooms upstairs they could go to, and everything was hands off. No police would raid anything, and they can do what they wanted to do. But out in public, you couldn't publicly be gay, which would cause a lot of problems in your life if you announced it. And I mean, that has changed.
That has changed. There was
thank God.
2 women. And they were historical, and England, who married each other. And they lived in plain sight of their neighbors, I guess, daring them to say anything. But they were so discreet and so well-behaved when they went out, they didn't hold hands, that the community pulled around them. But I thought that was interesting because they were living and married together in a time where if a man was caught in a similar situation, he would be put in jail.
But somebody actually married them?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's pretty cool.
Yes, you may want to look into it. I forget the names, but they were they were well known.
Yeah, wow.
It wasn't anything that they tried to hide.
I think that's terrific.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but just the fact that you have to watch how you behave, how you treat the person you love in public is just insane. I mean, look, there are certain things that heterosexual couples, I mean, if people are jumping over on each other in public, it's, save that for home, but there's no reason why you can't hold hands or kiss somebody once in a while in public. That's insane that you can't do that.
Well, I remember 10 years ago, we were living in Cleveland, Ohio, in a neighborhood, and there were reports of a woman being beaten by her husband. And the cop said, well, as long as he's beating her in the home, I have no problem with that. I'm not going to arrest them because it is said that man shall have the right to do this to his own wife and children. It's allowed.
That's insane.
And he really believed it, and he was following the letter of the law. There are a lot of laws on the books. You ever want to go and do something with the law?
Look, Ohio just passed is trying to pass through some of the worst abortion bill around.
Yes.
At the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's one reason why I gave Mary Handley, my heroine, she's a jiu-jitsu black belt.
Oh, good.
Yeah, when she grew up, she was very friendly with a Chinese girl. You know, the Chinese were very much looked down upon back then.
I know.
It was the Chinese Exclusion Act. They were trying to keep them from coming to the country. It was all these terrible things. But there was a Chinese family that lived close to her. And, you know, both Mary and the Chinese girl were both outcasts at school because, well, Mary was too intelligent for everybody, and they got frustrated with her. And the Chinese girl, because she was Chinese, and they became friends, and they had certain intellectual pursuits that were in common. And the father knew jiu-jitsu, and he was teaching his daughter how to protect herself, and he wound up teaching Mary also. So, I mean, that's how she wound up.
And it's believable.
Learning that. And it's believable.
It's believable.
Also, you know, growing up poor in Brooklyn, you didn't live in the nicest neighborhood. You never know who might attack you at some point. So it wasn't necessarily she was learning it to become a detective yet, but she was learning it to protect herself in her neighborhood and her environs, so nobody would pick on her.
Absolutely. I mean, my grandmother say, and that's a long hat pin situation where you always carry one or two, because if you use it, you're going to have a spare.
Right.
And she was that type of woman herself. She was very independent. She was strong-minded. She was bright. Her education stopped at third, fourth grade. I mean, she was a self-made woman, and she was a whiz in financial stuff. And men usually ran as fast as they could to get away from her.
Yeah, and, you know, it's as far as Mary is concerned, you know, she also has a sensitive and soft side. I mean, she wants certain things that other people want to. She would like to find somebody she could have a partner and fall in love with a man and things like that. It's not that she doesn't want those things. It's just that she wants them on her own terms. She doesn't want to be a slave to some man.
She wants an
to
equal.
have some sort of an equal relationship. And there were men back then who did believe in that, but they were not the majority.
No, I mean, I remember one of the things my spouse said to me. I asked him to marry me within a week of meeting him. And he said, I'm marrying you because you're wise and because you're my strength. He says, I would not consider it with any other woman because if you were weaker than I was, it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And I said, am I stronger than you? And he says, that's not going to work either. But it's interesting that, he was already 43, but it was interesting to me that a man would admit something like that.
Yeah.
Because that's difficult to do. I mean, after all, you're exposing your flank. And men don't do that. And neither do women, actually, especially then, because everything was dictated by society that was established by the higher echelons.
Right.
So I'm delighted you picked that time period. I mean, that was the time period my grandmother grew up in and became an adult and then moved to New York City. She lived in Manhattan all her life. I mean, she moved there and she died there. And some of the things she shared with me over the years were, you don't do it anymore. You won't see it anymore. I mean, they used to bring home fresh fish and put them in the bathtub to where they were ready to eat them. How many people do you know bring home fish from the fish market and put it in the bathtub?
No, I know. I mean, like, my wife shared with me that her mother in Texas, instead of, when they didn't have air conditioning, they used to, like, get a block of ice and put a fan next to it.
I could believe it. It's really hot during the summer. And that's why people took siestas in Mexico. It's not so much that they were lazy. That was the hottest part of the day.
Yeah.
And that was the time when they knew that working outside would kill them. So you got to, I think, looking into the customs and the morals and everything else that goes along with the person within the novel, you have to pay attention. Otherwise, their behavior sticks out.
Right. And interesting, something as simple as bathing was not a regular routine back then.
No.
Because they didn't, a lot of these places didn't have the plumbing or with the hot water. And in order to take a bath, it was a major process where you had to, take water, put it in a small little tub, and then heat some of it so that at least some of it was warm. And it was a major thing, and people didn't bathe regularly.
Not during the winter.
Yeah.
They put when I lived off the land, we would put the tub by the stove. We would lug it in from the well in a bucket. We would heat the bucket on the wood stove and then pour the water in. By the time you got it all warmed up, the bottom layer of cold water was chilly. You had really filthy water if you came in from the fields. And it was like a 15, 20-minute ordeal. And you didn't stretch out luxuriously, I'll tell you that much.
But, just getting back to my books for a second, I wrote them in a way so that they were, one, fast reads. I mean, the story keeps on moving. There are a lot of surprises. And also that it's not just very serious, dry history. There's a lot of fun in it. There's a lot of amusing conversations, intelligent conversations, but also very amusing and situations. So they're fun reads, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And what you're trying to say, if somebody picks it up, you're going to get American adults to read again.
That would be nice. I think American adults do read. It just
I do, but I think it will motivate them to read more.
Yeah.
So, are you planning a fourth book?
Yes, I am. I just finished my third, so I'm just trying to figure out what the fourth book is. And with the release dates, from what I understand, my publisher will not be releasing my third book for another year. So there will be, probably the year after that, the fourth book will be out once I figure out exactly what it is. But it will continue with Mary and the luminaries of the time, and she will continue to progress, and she progresses, and the people who are returned in each successive book will progress too, and they do change, as we all do.
Yeah, and that's good. That's good, because I've read some series where the character doesn't grow.
Yeah, no, but these characters grow, and there are some big changes afoot. Excuse me for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but
well, that's pretty neat. So you're being an author now is a full-time occupation with you.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, and I love it. I've, as you know, Lillian, most of my career I was a TV writer, and I won the Writers Guild Award. I was nominated for Emmys. I did shows like Seinfeld and Roseanne and Seventh Heaven and Facts of Life and Saved by the Bell, and so I was involved in a lot of very successful television, and I loved that. And it was a great career, and it supported me quite well. But what I like about novel writing is that I get to decide exactly how each character feels and what they do and things like that. When you're dealing with television, you have to depend on actors and directors to get the right feel that you intended in your script, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Within a book, you can say exactly what it is, and it's there.
And hope that one is translated into the big screen, that they won't change your characters too much.
Well, you can't control that too much. I mean, you can try, but what will happen, it happens in that particular case. You're dealing with television, dealing with a lot of money, or films, and you're dealing with a lot of money. And once you get a lot of other people involved, everybody has to have an opinion, and things change. Sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they don't. It's what they pay you for when they option your material.
Yes. Is once they buy it, it's no longer yours.
That's right. Although I did have a situation with a huge production company recently that had optioned my book for a TV series, and they promised me the world. And then when it got down to it, they wanted to do something that I didn't approve of with my main character, Mary Handley.
Yes.
And so I said, no, I don't want to do that, and I pulled it from them. And I guess people said, what, are you crazy? You turned out a TV series? And I said, look, I don't want to see a character I created turn into some superhero who is not really a real person, you know?
Yeah, or turn into a cross-dresser or something.
Yeah, whatever it is, you know.
And no, I don't blame you at all. It's
So I mean, I still eventually have plans for her to continue on in the visual medium. In fact, if you read my books, you realize that they are quite visual in that respect. But that's how I was brought up, as you can picture everything, which is kind of fun.
Yes, well, I storyboard my stories, so I understand exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And people have told me that when they pick up my books, they can see the characters or whatever I'm writing about, and they love it because it gives them freedom to imagine what they think it should look like. So,
and they're as interested with other people to do my books, so it will eventually get done.
Sounds good. Do you feel that winning or being nominated awards help you with your novel career?
I don't know if it does. I mean, it's a nice introduction, but in the end, it's the book they have to like.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I want people to hear this because when I talk to a lot of would-be writers or writers who've been out in the field, they say, well, it's no use, all those people winning awards and this and that and everything else. And I'm staring at them because before any of this started, there were people who came up through the ranks who nobody knows. Nobody knew. I
mean, let me put it this way. It helps in the original introduction to, like, say, an agent or possibly an agent pitches you to an editor, to a publishing company. But in the end, it's the book that matters. And if they don't like the book, it's not going to happen.
If they don't get past the first three sentences,
and the reason people turn down books aren't necessarily because it's not a good book. They have in their minds what they think is commercial or what segment. And that's another thing, because there are some places that you go with certain books and you may not take that book. And you may not who buy certain types of books and don't buy other types of books. So you have to know your market also, as far as publishing companies are concerned.
Absolutely.
And who to go to. And that's not everybody knows that. That's something that you have to learn or somehow get an agent who's aware of that.
Absolutely. So do you have any other words of wisdom before we close the interview?
Yes, buy 2nd Street Station and Brooklyn on Fire. I think everybody will really enjoy it. Okay,
great. And before you go away and stray, folks, you can hear this interview over again at PassionateWorldRadioNetwork.com. Facebook.com/PWR Network LLC, Twitter.com /@CAULDWELL, Google+.com/PWR Talk Network, and YouTube.com/PWR Network LLC. And before we go away, Cicero had this to say about nature: I follow nature as the surest guide and resign myself with implicit obedience to her sacred ordinances. Thank you all very much for listening.
Thank you for having me on, Lillian.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
All right.
And keep listening.
Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.